we are okay now. So anyway, all of this is about reinforcing how we make a difference. And you've probably all heard about NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And I think it would be okay to say that the Green Springs effort in the 1970s and beyond has had a substantial dose of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And maybe you as a history lover or a preservationist could have been called a NIMBY, and maybe you've actually responded by being a YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. But regardless of where you fall on this NIMBY-YIMBY spectrum, I have decided that for the duration, I'm renaming historic preservation as PIMBYs, P-I-M-B-Y, preservation in my backyard. I think it works both ways. Because the people and the places that I work with and I work for are all about preservation. They're about preservation practice, preservation philosophy, preservation policy, preservation parity, and yes, even some preservation politics. Collectively, they have embraced and are trying to spread preservation not only in their backyards, but beyond. In late September, Preservation Virginia held its long-delayed 2020 and this year's 2022 Preservation Awards ceremony at our historic Scotchtown home of Patrick Henry in Hanover County. And I kind of put this messy image in just to share a little bit about the process. There we are in the committee in a Zoom meeting, reviewing the materials that had been submitted by people in the city of Danville, and they're the actual result of our awards process. But as I reviewed nominations and the work, I just was incredibly overcome with how what I call PIMBYs, our nominees and awardees, represent the breadth of the geographic and cultural diversity of Virginia's preservationists who advocate for traditional and indigenous cultural places, communities, countryside, presidential home sites, places of worship, industry, and commerce. Some are places where people labored because they were enslaved and where their descendants have later reclaimed not only their freedom, but also their voices and finding the right to influence how and who will tell their stories. These are places now not only of history, but also of acknowledgement and recognition. And I pondered, what does a history that centers people and place look like? What does Virginia's history tell us about temporality, endurance, disappearance, reemergence, threats and emergencies, resilience and disasters? You know a little about that, and Louisa, and opportunities. I think it looks a lot like those of us who are still exploring, interpreting, and preserving our own backyard histories. You'll see in a few minutes a preservation tribute to the first woman chief to lead a tribe in Virginia since the 18th century. She has worked to preserve and educate the public in her history, culture, and traditions, and to secure federal recognition and to reacquire tribal land, but also to establish important preservation initiatives, including the recently formed Virginia Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Preservation Fund, or BIPOC. That's something that many of us worked very hard over the last couple of years to establish in Virginia. In our awards, we also recognize a descendant-led organization reshaping and sharing in new and meaningful ways the narratives of enslaved Americans at Virginia plantation sites. But nuts and bolts, brick and stone, craftsmanship, and professional expertise in the broad fields of historic preservation, archaeology, and historic architecture remain in our lifeblood. And we still find challenges in approaching 17th and 18th century sites, particularly those of commerce and industry. And we all remain ever ready to understand and perpetuate and practice traditional trades to keep those alive. At our legislative virtual event last winter, we heard about the economic value of practicing traditional trades. And so we found the restoration of Thomas Jefferson's father's Shadwell circa 1775 grist mill particularly interesting and to be award-worthy. As we contemplate the future and the growth that necessarily accompanies it, we also realized in making our award decisions that we need to continue to look for ways to revive declining and blighted neighborhoods in some of Virginia's once thriving cities, industrial cities that are aiming to enhance their property values, local revenues, and restore urban vitality. And so we awarded projects in the Tobacco Warehouse District block in Danville, and a new B&B and one of the oldest houses in Bristol, Virginia. I'd like to turn for a few minutes to a partial video of our awards night at Scotchtown. First, with a few remarks of the patriotic philanthropist whom we honored with our signature award this year, David Rubenstein, for his very generous support of historic places in Virginia. And we'll see then, following David Rubenstein's partial remarks, short video clips from both our 2020 and our 2022 awardees. So now we're going to switch from PowerPoint to YouTube.
Recognizes that what happened before it provides lessons of what might be useful to live with in the future. In other words, if you learn what was made as a mistake before, you probably can correct that mistake in the future. A famous Harvard historian, George Santayana, said, "Those who do not remember history are condemned to relive it." And so, of course, we want to preserve what happened in the past so we can learn from it and hopefully learn from the mistakes. But the real question people should ask is this: well, we can preserve what the words are in the Declaration of Independence. We can preserve what the Mount Vernon looked like. We can preserve what the Federalist Papers said, or we can preserve what the first map of the United States, which I bought and now put on display at the Library of Congress. We can see what all these things are on a computer slide. So why do we actually need to preserve the actual buildings, the actual books, the actual documents? Well, this is the reason, in my view. The human brain has advanced dramatically in the last several 100,000 years as we, all Homo sapiens, have emerged from caves and built civilization. Fortunately, while we have great technological skills and developments, the human brain has not yet evolved to the point where seeing the Mount Vernon in person is the same as seeing it on a computer slide. Seeing Monticello in person is not the same as seeing it on a computer slide. Reading the Declaration of Independence in the original document is not the same as seeing a computer slide of it. And why is that important? Well, what we have in our country is a history deficit. We obviously have financial deficits, we have other deficits in our country, but we have a true history deficit. The people in our country aren't learning history to the extent that they used to, and they should. And as a result, you learn things like this. The average American cannot pass the citizenship test needed to become a citizen in this country if you're a foreign citizen. In other words, foreign citizens or foreigners who want to become U.S. citizens have to take a basic citizenship test, and 91% of them pass it. The same test was essentially given to Americans born in this country several years ago in all 50 states, and only one state, and a bare majority, actually passed that test. What does that tell you? It tells you that we don't really know much about our history and our civics, in part because we don't teach it very much anymore. So what we want to do is make sure we do things that enable people to learn and value the past. One of the best ways of doing that is preserving buildings, for example. When somebody goes to see Mount Vernon, almost certainly before they go to Mount Vernon, they're going to hear about it or read about it. And without doubt, when they go there, they're going to get a tour and a lot more knowledge about it than they had before. And then when they go home, most likely they're going to read about it. And as a result of those experiences, they're going to know much more about Mount Vernon or George Washington than they would have just if they'd seen Mount Vernon on a computer slide. So while maybe in 1,000 years or so, seeing something on a computer slide will be the same as seeing it in person. But we hopefully won't get to that point, and we certainly aren't there now. And so the value of preserving is because we want to make certain we have civilization improve in the future. We want to make certain people understand the history, the good and the bad of the past, and we can make judgments about what we should do better in the future. And so I applaud all of you who are taking your time and your energy to help out with the preservation of Virginia. And as I like to remind people, philanthropy is an ancient Greek word. It's derived from an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. Those who are fortunate enough to be able to write checks, that's great for them to be able to do so, and I congratulate those who do so. But I like to remind people that the most valuable thing you can give to preserve anything or help your country is your time. Time is the only commodity we cannot manufacture, we can't make more of. We all have a finite amount of time on the face of this earth. And so to all of you, I would encourage you to think about what you can do more than you've already done using your time and as well as your energy and your ideas. Because everyone can't afford to do the things that provide money to some of these institutions. And while money is important to enable them to fix and preserve the buildings or other kinds of things like documents, it's not possible for everybody to do those kind of things. So what I think everybody should do is think about what they can do to use their time, energy, and ideas to help preserve Virginia's buildings, because by doing so, people that visit them will learn more about Virginia's history, the good and the bad, and learn more about how we can all be better Americans and better citizens. And so I applaud all of you for what you've done, and I want to thank you for what I would call your patriotic philanthropy, because all of you are patriotic philanthropists by doing what you're doing to help preserve the buildings, the historic buildings of Virginia. My part has been very, very modest. I don't live in Virginia. I didn't grow up in Virginia, and I also didn't go to school in Virginia. However, I think that what's happened in Virginia is an important part of our historic country. And some of the most important events and some of the most important buildings and houses in our country happen to be in Virginia. So it's just fortuitous that all of you who live in Virginia, and I assume most of you do, happen to live in a country, in a state which has enormous value to the country. And so we're helping the country by preserving these historic buildings, because other people from around the country and around the world will be able to see, as a result of your efforts, these kind of buildings preserved, and they can learn more about these buildings and more about our history and more about ways we can make certain in the future we do better than we've done in the past in certain areas. So thank you all very much for honoring me this way. I'm sorry I couldn't be there this evening, but I just hope all of you realize that what you're doing is a very great act of philanthropy, is a great act of giving back to your country, not only to your state. And I hope all the citizens of the whole country recognize that when they come to Virginia, they're going to see historic buildings that are really important to our country's history, and they've been preserved in large part by the efforts of people like you and your organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein. We greatly appreciate you taking the time this evening, and we do look forward to presenting you with the award in person sometime very soon, and hope you'll be able to stay tuned as we make the awards to our other recipients.